afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Information Week webinar, Automate to Accelerate, Overcoming Staffing and Compliance Challenges in Cyber Risk Management. It's sponsored by LogicGate and broadcast by Informa. I'm Peter Krass with Information Week, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we begin, I have a few very quick announcements. This webinar is designed to be interactive. There's a dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen, and that will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media, and participate in the Q&A session that we'll have toward the end of the presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and you can also download content materials via the resources widget. Toward the end of the webinar, I'll ask you to provide feedback via a survey widget that's found at the bottom of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before you leave us today. Your feedback provides us with valuable information on how we can improve these events in the future. And finally, if you have any technical issues during this webinar, you can click the Help widget that's at the bottom of your screen, or just type your issue right into the Q&A area. And either way, we'll be happy to offer you one-on-one assistance. And that's it for our announcements. So let's move on to our presentation, Automate to Accelerate, Overcoming Staffing and Compliance Challenges in Cyber Risk Management. We have three very fine speakers today, starting with John Siegler. He's co-founder and chief product officer at LogicGate. Megan Saul, head of product marketing and analyst relations, also at LogicGate. And Adam Glover, IT Audit Senior Manager at Insight Assurance. If you'd like to learn more about any of our speakers, you can find their bios in the speaker bio window that's on your screen. And if you'd like to ask any of our speakers a question for the Q&A, just use that Q&A window on the middle of your screen. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Megan Saul. Megan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. So as Peter just mentioned, my name is Megan, and I'm joined here today with LogicGate Chief Product Officer John Siegler, and then Adam Glover, IT Audit Senior Manager from our partners over at Insight Assurance. We've got some great content lined up for you all today, so let's go ahead and dive right in. So John and Adam, I have to believe that everyone in the audience today probably has a lot in common, namely too many things to do and not enough time to get them all done. And that especially doubles if they're in the midst of a compliance audit as we speak. So we all know compliance, it's not optional, it's not going anywhere anytime soon, but we also know it's not quite enough, right, to secure those critical assets and really build market trust. And unless you have a fully staffed cybersecurity team and unlimited resources, so otherwise put you are a unicorn, there's a good chance that doing more with less is really your best path forward to finally having enough time to connect cyber risk to business impact and really elevate the reputation of your team. So John, as a former risk consultant and GRC startup founder, you know the toll that compliance audits can place on teams. And Adam, as an auditor, I'm sure you have hundreds of insights to share around really what makes that external audit process go smoothly and also where things might kind of break down. So today's webinar is all about sharing these insights with you, our audience, so you can automate out tedious tasks like evidence collection and really focus on more meaningful work without putting your next audit deadline at risk. So I think, John, it makes sense to just dive right in and start with you. At LogicGate, you hear from dozens of security and audit teams who spend hundreds of hours every year gathering control evidence to demonstrate compliance with new and, frankly, constantly evolving requirements. How are teams holding up? What are you hearing? And also, what's the broader impact to the rest of the organization?
Yeah, so in my role, I get the privilege to talk to a lot of our customers directly about their programs. And so I get to see firsthand and hear firsthand how these affect not only their security and audit teams that are often kind of running and responsible for these programs, but also everyone else across the enterprise who interacts with these processes to get compliant with control frameworks or compliance requirements. And we constantly hear from our customers who express that they're under enormous pressure due to increasing complexities, the intensified workload, new frameworks that their companies are taking on in order to enter new markets. So I would say survival might be the best way to describe it right now, to be honest. A lot of our customers are dealing with upwards of 10 to 15 frameworks that they need to be able to be compliant with. Spread that across different, maybe they have multiple product lines that they're offering that have different requirements for each of them. Those are in different geographies, which maybe have different compliance requirements associated with them. It becomes very complex to manage all of this activity that they need to do. So we polled our customers earlier this year. We sent a survey to a lot of our customers about their controls compliance programs. And many noted that roughly a third of their team's time, on the cyber compliance side specifically, was spent just on evidence collection for their audits that they do. Many noted hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, and we even had one customer said that their organization spent over 4,000 hours in a year just on collecting the evidence they need to prove compliance for their control audits. So we're really interested in improving this process because there's a clear problem here to go solve. And then we're also interested in the toll this takes on other stakeholders across the business, because it's not just the cyber compliance audit teams that are running into this. It's everyone else that is a stakeholder to this process. And really upping the perception of the risk and compliance and audit teams within an organization. If you can go back to your stakeholders and say, you know what, that process I ask you to do, that file, that evidence I ask you to upload every month, every quarter, every year, you no longer have to do that. It really makes you a much more valuable strategic partner to the business. So yeah, that's how, those are some of the demands being placed on our customers, from their words, and how it's kind of impacting the broader organization.
Excellent. And Adam, one of the things I love about bringing you and John together is you can bring a perspective from the complete opposite end, right, of this whole process. So as an external auditor, what are you and your team at Insight Assurance seeing out there in the wild in terms of how teams are managing this increasingly kind of growing burden?
Yeah, I mean, to John's point, it's a real challenge, right? You have limited resources, limited time, and then your compliance requirements are ever growing. So yeah, what we see a lot is and a big push towards automation and compliance in general is trying to get rid of some of the vendor risk management burdens that you have to deal with the lengthy questionnaires and things like that. That takes up just as much time. I know John was talking about evidence collection for the audit process, and that is also a lengthy burden, but that vendor risk management is a tough problem to solve, and it's only going to get worse, I think, because it's growing exponentially with the number of vendors people are becoming reliant upon. And then you have the extension of that going into subcontractors and going into these fourth parties that oftentimes are overlooked because people are too overburdened just trying to worry about their third parties. So definitely a challenge for sure.
So I'm sure there's probably a lot of head nodding in the audience right now that likely resonates with a whole lot of people who joined us today. And John, kind of keeping all of that in mind, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Compliance might kind of feel like a check the box hamster wheel of sorts, but it's not going anywhere. What are you seeing customers do today to keep up in the short and the long term?
Yeah, I think in the short term, I am always kind of impressed at the resilience and adaptability of the customers that we get to work with in terms of constantly evolving and streamlining their processes and programs using technology. So how do you leverage technology as that force multiplier in the short term that you have to be able to automate processes, reduce the margin of error and the workload that's being placed on your additional team? So ultimately improving the quality and reliability of some of the compliance programs that you have set up. So how can you leverage the technology you have in order to solve those problems better? For the long term, we're obviously working on, we just released an important capability in our platform for automating evidence collection, which is kind of the problem I spoke about at the top. but also that, this also has nothing to do with technology at the same time. And how do we help organizations kind of look at compliance as not that siloed task? I often talk about this as like culture of risk across the organization, have teams take ownership in the process and fostering that company-wide culture of compliance and risk. So shifting that thought process away from that individual siloed team to the broader organization. I think as we kind of embed technology to automate some of the repetitive tasks, that becomes easier because we don't have to think about that tactical providing evidence or that tactical check the box exercise of compliance. We can be more strategic and thoughtful about the programs and programs we set up for the long term, really ultimately reduce risk for the organization.
Great insights. And Adam, so kind of building on that, you speak with lots of different types of teams across a variety of different industries and locations. And based off of kind of what you're seeing out there, what are you seeing work for teams most effectively? Like, are there core differences between those who maybe struggle a little bit in that audit process versus, where it goes really smoothly?
Yeah. And I think John kind of hit it right on the head there. The core difference is really getting rid of those silos and breaking down those walls between the different departments and units within your organization. If you're leaving it siloed specifically to InfoSec or specifically to compliance or whatever, depending on how your organization is structured and how big and complex you are, that really leads to a lot of challenges. This problem needs to be visible to everyone in the organization, all the executives, the board, everyone really needs to be involved from the top down so that it works as smoothly as possible. And everyone should be of the understanding that compliance or a check the box approach, compliance is really just your starting point. Compliance is essentially getting you to a baseline, to a foundation. It really doesn't equal security in all aspects. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there too. A lot of times people are under the impression that, hey, we're compliant with such and such, today, but does that really mean we're secure? And those are two completely different things. And the burden of compliance is heavy, but then the burden of security is even greater. So definitely breaking down those silos is the most important thing.
And let's kind of build on that a little bit more, Adam. I think it's really apparent to all of us, certainly, right? IT and cybersecurity teams are kind of having a moment right now. We have the SEC regulations in the US bringing CISOs front and center. In the EU, we have things like DORA. They really have an opportunity to kind of shift internal perceptions around what they do and really help them link what their teams and themselves might be up to, right, to actual business impact and strategy. You kind of hinted at this before, but what's the advantage here of kind of repositioning IT and cybersecurity as really like a strategic business partner within that organization, and like any tips for like how you get started?
Yeah, I would say the biggest tip for how you get started is making sure your organizational structure is sound. I would say a lot of times what I've seen in a lot of organizations, especially ones that struggle in this realm, is having security or compliance or something like that report to another VP. So a classic example you'll see is having security report to IT or to the CIO. Those two are inherently at conflict, right? Security and operations are never going to work together well. Security wants to hinder operations, and the CIO, he just wants to push forward and move operations faster and faster. So having that dichotomy is always challenging, and then as a result, security and the CIO's voice is muffled, and then the whole program suffers. So I think really getting that alignment of where you want your security personnel, your CISOs, your compliance people, where they report is very important. I would always encourage them to report, directly to the highest level or to the board directly. That way they have a voice at the table. And then kind of go from there.
Adam, I have a follow-up question for you on that. If some that are on this call might be reporting, into a CIO, for example, and it might not be a non-ideal situation. Outside of like a restructuring, is there any advice you can share with them of maybe how to how to build that culture themselves, more from a bottom-up perspective or across the organization, without kind of restructuring the reporting relationships?
Yeah, that's challenging, right? I mean, I think the best example I've seen throughout my career is having a CISO that's a little bit more outgoing, I would say, and willing to build those relationships across VP levels. Not to say that they're going to circumvent the CIO, but if they have strong relationships with the HR director and other areas of the organization, then that helps breed that security culture throughout.
So what I've heard so far, and I'm going to put words in both your mouths, so keep me honest here, is really that we all agree compliance is kind of like the floor, right? It's a starting point. It's important, but it's not really what we're all here for necessarily, right, in our roles. And there's a lot of stuff going on, competing priorities, and maybe in some instances, not the most ideal reporting structure, right, or org structure for people to kind of make a culture of risk and security happen at their organization. So, John, kind of thinking a little bit more on that, seems kind of like a tall order, right? Because really we're like, go beyond compliance, be proactive in security, proactive in risk, but also do all this other stuff. So how do you navigate that and strike that right balance between making sure like the deadlines are met, right, but that you're constantly moving towards a more strategic position for your team? Yeah,
I think nobody likes to be in the spot where they're being asked to do more with less resources. I think that's the state, a lot of you all find yourselves in. However, I mean, there are some actions you can take if you find yourself in that situation. I think first is kind of taking stock of priorities. What is priority for you? What's making the most impact? What's the most significant things that you can work on and prioritize, and how do those tie up to your strategic goals as a company and organization to kind of show value up through the company? I think, good advice for anybody just taking stock of low impact tasks that maybe your teams are doing that they really don't need to be doing. So that would be my first place to look. The second is around automation, streamlining the repetitive tasks that we all do on a day-to-day basis is probably one of the strongest ways to manage that workload. So identify processes that can be automated easily. If you implement a solution like LogicGate's platform, centralizing and managing all of your GRC related activities in one place where you can start to automate some of those like repetitive things you're doing if you're kind of still coming from like a spreadsheets and email based system, ultimately, streamline some of those workflows, better decision making. And then the third, I think, is focus on collaboration and communication with your business stakeholders and encourage that open communication and collaborations. I think when your stakeholders in the business understand the why behind something, why are we doing this? Why are we providing this evidence? Why are we doing this attestation? Why are we doing this risk assessment? It will lead to better knowledge sharing and more efficient work that you all are doing, because there'll be less questions, there'll be better data quality. They'll take ownership, hopefully take ownership in some of the work that they're doing. So again, kind of goes back to fostering that enterprise-wide culture of risk awareness and compliance, so that ultimately it is that shared responsibility. It isn't just burdening the compliance teams, the cyber teams, the audit teams to go do that.
I think one of the common threads that we see just in our own network at LogicGate is people trying to make that business case, right? Because when you're so close to it every day, you know how many hours your team spends on tasks that maybe could be automated, and what the people hours, what the cost of that is, as well as the opportunity cost of not doing something else because you're bogged down with all this manual workload. It can be easy to think that other teams might get it, but maybe they've never seen it, right? So I think one of the coolest things I've seen recently is one of our customers who sat down with a spreadsheet that looked at estimations of hours spent doing these tedious tasks, people hour costs, basically built that out over a year, and then used that for a business case for here's why it actually is worth it to automate this stuff and invest in new tech, and what that could mean for his team. But John, to kind of build more on that, what does that mean? I know we've talked a little bit about efficiencies and the like, and like really moving the needle on security, but what else is there that people should be thinking about when kind of making the case for automating manual workloads?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it. Time and efficiency is number one. If we can automate those repetitive tasks that we're doing on a monthly or quarterly basis and kind of offload the burden of not only the mental burden of having to remind yourself of the tasks and actually do them, but then actually doing that task. So we're talking about evidence collection, asking someone to go in a system and take a screenshot and upload that evidence on a monthly or quarterly basis. If we can kind of just remove that task entirely, all the way from the email we send them to them logging into the system to pulling it down to then spending time back and forth of whether that was the right thing they pulled. So that frees up your team's schedule and everybody's schedules to go work on more strategic focused stuff. The second is, I think, accuracy and consistency of that data that's coming back. If we can set up the automations around it, we know what to expect. It's reliable, it's consistent. If there's a new person in a role, for example, and we're still manually, collecting some sort of evidence against a compliance framework, they might not be pulling the same thing the person pulled last time, and then there's kind of that rework component. The third is risk reduction, and that comes from eventually moving towards this like concept of real-time monitoring and testing, setting up some of the automations and integrations with our platforms that are core sources of evidence, eventually being able to tell and opine of whether that evidence is within the bounds of our controls or outside of it. And if it's outside of it, we really want to alert the teams more in real time. So that's kind of where we're moving towards as a company to be able to support our customers with. There's an element of scalability for your company as you grow and scale, enter new markets. You need to then comply with new compliance requirements and frameworks. If you have a strong foundation set up, that becomes much easier to do. And then lastly, improve decision-making. So again, spending time in the right places. Are we spending time on the tactical, kind of following up on these day-to-day tasks? Or are we spending time thinking about a question like, can we improve this control? What is the next level of maturity look like for this control? Is this exposing us to risk? Should we be doing something different? I think being able to ask those types of questions. And then one other one to mention, there's a lot of them here, but think of, in the role as, let's say you're on a cyber compliance team, or really any compliance team for that matter. Your customer in a way is your stakeholders across the business. So if we think about building a better customer experience for our team and the way it interacts with the rest of the business, many do not like these manual tasks that they repeat every quarter. I think it's a distraction for them. It's not part of their core job. Kind of goes back to that concept of elevating the security compliance teams in the organization. If we can build a better experience for the stakeholders that interact with our processes we have, then ultimately it's better, improved morale, improved culture, improved that culture of risk kind of expanding across the organization.
What I love about that, John, is we actually have a customer today who tracks vacant security positions as part of their overall risks that they report up to their committee. And I think there's a real link there to risk reduction with just investing in tools and technology that can make the lives of resource-strapped cybersecurity teams even easier. So really love that you touched on that. And Adam, you hinted at this earlier, right? Control evidence collection is just like one side of the coin. There's also risk assessments and evaluating third parties and all these other things going on. So when you imagine all the different alerts and notifications hitting different risk and control owners across the org, it adds up. And I think if there's one team that gets alert fatigue more than others, it's probably people who are listening to us today. So kind of on that same front, Adam, you've seen a lot of different people go through this process, right? Who may use automation, may not use automation. Since that's really what the core of what we're speaking about today, have you noticed any differences between those teams and kind of the outcomes of the audits that you all help run?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think automation is sort of the wave of the future, right? So taking that some of those manual burdens off and making it easier. So not only is the on the client side, not only are you guys saving time and energy and effort, hours, all that, but then that equates as well to the audit side. So from an audit standpoint, we're not having to do the same types of things we did in the past. So with the automation platforms like LogicGate, we can go into your instance of that and pull down the evidence on our side without even having to bother you guys. So that makes our process run much smoother, much less hours involved. You're going to have a lower cost audit as a result. And the tedious thing that I think people found more so, even I guess arguably more so than the evidence collection piece and going back and forth with the Excel spreadsheets and all that, was the walkthroughs that needed to be done in the past. So the hours and hours of walkthroughs where you'd have to sit down and meet with HR and meet with IT and meet with security and all these various people. With the introduction of automation, those have pretty much become non-existent. We may have a period of time after we've completed our initial examination where we'll have to go back and meet with somebody. We may have some follow-up questions to clarify a few things here or there, but generally speaking, it's all right there, and it makes it much simpler, for sure.
And we're kind of painting this beautiful future state, John, but I think the reality is there's probably a lot of people listening today who are still managing audit and compliance workflows and spreadsheets. And depending on where they are in their process, that might be the best option for them today. We know it breaks down quickly when it's not enough to scale. So, if someone is the audience today, look like, hey, I think it might be time to move from a spreadsheet to something more technical, maybe like an actual software solution, what should they keep in mind? What's next for them?
Yeah, well, let me just say that I've been there before with spreadsheets, so I definitely understand there's a place and time for that for sure. And there's a time to be scrappy, but there's also the time to be mature and be able to scale your programs. So it's perfectly normal to start your compliance operations using spreadsheets and using shared drives, especially when your organization is new or smaller. It's cost effective in the beginning. However, we've seen many kind of growing, scaling businesses, though that starts to break down at some point for sure. As your business gets more complex, you have more compliance requirements you're being asked to adhere to. So a few areas of advice I would have, kind of like as you're looking to mature and when should you look to mature, I guess first is kind of understanding and acknowledging some of the hidden costs of managing a program with spreadsheets. The time, I think it feels safe and secure to all of us. We're probably all natural, and a lot of you all, I believe, are kind of natural in spreadsheets, and it kind of feels like home when you're dealing with data there. But that data quality, the manual nature of data entry, the emailing back and forth manually, lack of collaboration, difficulty to visualize that data, track on issues and errors that are present. So I think those are some of the hidden things we deal with in spreadsheets that kind of go away once we have a more established process around GRC. Second, I would identify which processes could actually benefit from automation. It's not going to be everything. So kind of having a focused approach on where you could gain benefit from automating part of your processes. The third, just to be realistic, like review your budget. Do you have budget to migrate to a more robust solution, to get off of spreadsheets onto a platform like a comprehensive GRC platform? It is an investment. We believe the return on investment is there for sure, but it does mean that you do need budget to be able to acquire a tool like that. So starting small with if you decide that's the route, starting small with kind of identified use case to go prove value, whether it's in one compliance framework or even just a handful of controls you want to automate. The others, maybe you asked to do manual collection, but picking a couple of controls from key systems that you can automate to kind of show value quickly and then kind of expand as you go. And then, yeah, there's for sure a world beyond spreadsheets, and it means improved efficiency, better collaboration, reduced risk. But, taking one step at a time will ultimately be able to get you there. But definitely okay for those that are managing their programs on spreadsheets today. It's the right call in certain circumstances.
Adam, what about from your perspective? Anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different for every organization, right? It just depends on how big you are, how quick you're growing, how many product lines you have, how many compliance frameworks you're subjecting yourself to. The more frameworks you have, the more it makes sense to automate, because it all kind of carries across and it's analogous. Once you build that foundation, a lot of those controls are going to overlap. I would say one of the things to keep in mind is the ROI when you're considering moving towards an automation piece. It is going to be a heavy lift in the beginning. It is going to require a lot of time and effort and hours. But once you get it set up and moving into year 2, year 3, once you get it set up, once you've gone through an audit, and then moving forward into years 2, 3, 4, 5, moving into the future, then it's going to become much, much simpler, and you're really going to see a huge return on your investment, and you're really going to kind of reap those rewards. I think one of the things, and this may be slightly off topic, so I apologize if I'm veering too far off course, but I think one of the things that we see a lot with the platforms, the client will get it, they'll start putting stuff in there, then they'll say, okay, well, the platform says we're fine. So as an auditor, what do we even need you guys for? The platform says we're doing okay. But nobody's going in and validating that information, right? So that's really our role, is to validate that information and ensure that you are doing what you're saying you're doing and you are meeting those compliance standards. So a lot of times there's a misconception that the platform says we're okay, we've thrown some stuff in there, so it must be fine, and we don't really need anything else beyond that. But there really is a validation piece, and there's making sure that what you're doing and what you're attaching to those controls and what you're trying to automate are the correct things. And I think John alluded to that a little bit earlier. So,
yeah, good call out there. And I think that you can have automation without integration, but it gets really exciting, right, when you start integrating across the enterprise tech stack, especially when it comes to things like controls compliance use cases. And so, John, we'll start with you first, and then Adam, feel free to do a fast follow. But as you're kind of looking at your landscape, considering what tools that it might make sense to integrate with, like, is there maybe a tool category that you recommend people look at first? Interested in what you would recommend there, John.
Yeah, I think integrations are really the cornerstone of automations when we're talking about compliance and compliance evidence. So a couple of considerations generally to keep in mind about systems and whether we can integrate with them is, are they, just use the term interoperable, meaning can we seamlessly ask for information from that system? And what this typically means is, does it have an API available? Can you programmatically request something from the system where that evidence lives to be able to consistently set up a rule that can ask that question continuously? So that's number one, is that like interoperability question. And number two is security. Is there a secure way to access that information? And can we get to it securely and use best practices with REST APIs and secure file transfer? So those are really the two considerations generally for any software we're going to integrate with to pull compliance information from. And then in terms of like more specifically, where do we kind of recommend teams to start in terms of like specific software or types of software? The first would be kind of ticketing systems or IT management tools. This could be any system where you track issues, incidents, changes, IT assets even. So think like Jira or ServiceNow or GitHub or GitLab for changes to code or configurations. Usually contain a lot of relevant compliance information that ties back to many different standards across frameworks. Second area, second type of software that we would recommend is like an HRIS platform. So think your Workday, UKG, Paylocity. Those would be systems that show what employees are active, who was onboarded, who was offboarded over a certain time period. Again, kind of generally apply to most control frameworks that are out there. Third, identity and access management. Who has rights to what systems and at what permission level? Is their password policies enforced in the right locations? And then we'd look to more technical sources of evidence like network security tools, so firewalls, intrusion detection systems, anti-malware tools that are in place across the organization. Look at things like log management or SIM tools. There's a lot of network events, access logs that are contained in those systems. And then lastly, on the more technical front would be cloud platforms. So AWS, Azure, GCP, a lot of configuration information. For example, is our data encrypted at rest? We can easily answer that question through AWS, Azure, et cetera, because that configuration data is typically available for our production system. So focus on automating evidence from systems that kind of have rich data available that you're consistently going and pulling from, and systems that are generally accessible to have that information pulled from.
And Adam, what about from you? I know you and your team have a lot of experience with a lot of different automation tools. Like, any common themes where teams kind of start first when it comes to automating this type of thing or integrating?
Yeah, I mean, I think John did a really nice job of running down the list there. He really hit all the key systems. The only one that you may have missed, or if you mentioned it, I know you mentioned malware, so you may have mentioned it, and I just missed it. But the only other one that I can think of is your MDM solution. So making sure to tie that in as well. That has a lot of good components to it. But yeah, once your integrations are complete, once you've tied things in, you've got your configuration settings and all that, then the very next key step is scoping. So determining what's in scope and what's out of scope related to your compliance requirements. So if you have 5 different service offerings and 2 of them have privacy requirements and the other 3 don't, then there's various things that you need to do there from a scoping standpoint, taking not only infrastructure out of scope, but also accounts and other systems out of scope as well. So really narrowing that down, getting those integrations up and running, and then narrowing down the scope is the next key thing to move forward with a successful and smooth audit.
All right. Awesome. So what's in scope, what saves the most time, and what's technically possible? I really appreciate you both sharing all of these awesome insights with us around automating risk compliance and audit. So we just spent the top of the hour, right, discussing the benefits, what you can get out of considering making this move. And before we get into Q&A with John and Adam, let's take a look at what this actually can look like in practice inside of LogicGate Risk Cloud. So if you're not familiar, Risk Cloud is an automated GRC platform that's really purpose-built to help you all kind of manage every aspect of your compliance and audit programs. So one connected view of assets, risk controls, and findings, all while making it very easy, right, to link these same components back to your strategy and overall business impact. So we just launched a new automated evidence collection feature earlier this year. John hinted at this a little earlier. I think you're all going to want to see it. So grab some popcorn. We're going to play a short demo now, and then we'll circle back to answer any questions you all have for John and Adam after that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Avi Hershkowitz, a product manager here at LogicGate. I'm in charge of our automated evidence collection initiative, and I'm excited to demo this to you all today. So here I have a controls compliance application. I have my automated evidence collection configured here. I'll walk through what this looks like from an end user's perspective and then show you all how easy it is to just turn on for our power users and our builders. So here I have an example control setup in my controls compliance app. From this page, this control is just looking at a list of active third parties. We manage our third parties here in LogicGate. So we'd be able to easily pull a list of those active third parties from LogicGate, and I can show you how to configure automation to do so. Scrolling down here, you will see our new evidence collection automation section where you're able to create and configure evidence collection automations. Clicking on this, you will be able to name the automation, as well as see options from where you can pull evidence. So the first we have here is what we're calling our user uploaded source. So what this will do is actually automate the create and linking of either a control evaluation or a evidence record, depending on how you use your controls compliance application. This is very configurable, so you can really do this however you prefer. So again, this will create that new record, link it back to your control. You can configure automations to send to your users. This won't be automating the actual evidence collection itself with this one, but it will automate the process of getting there, notify your users, and let them know they have to come and actually upload that evidence. Then we have what we're calling our custom endpoint source. So what this looks like, a great example of this is just any system that has a REST API or API documentation, you'd be able to pull information from that system just by putting in information on that endpoint here. So for example, a common control that I see used for this is access controls. So take something like your ticketing system. Jira, for example, has really great API documentation. They have an endpoint where you're able to get a list of all of the users in that environment. You can easily put that endpoint here, add in whatever authentication you might need, and get a list of all of the users with access to Jira easily uploaded into the Risk Cloud. And again, that can work with any system that has REST API documentation. Then we have our Google Drive source. So this will allow you to look at your Google Drive. You'd be able to open up what is called the Google Picker UI, authenticate with your individual Google account, and then choose a file. On that set cadence, we would pull back that file, convert it to PDF, and then surface that in LogicGate to provide to an auditor. So this is really useful for control owners that don't have access to LogicGate, where they can just upload evidence into a Google Drive file. For policy and procedure controls, if you're managing those out of Google Drive as well, this will allow you to pull down a point-in-time copy of any file, convert it to PDF, show that it's uneditable. We add timestamps to it as well, and surface that in the Risk Cloud. Then we have what we call our Risk Cloud source, and that's what I'll demo for you guys today. So for example, like I said, we're managing our third parties here in LogicGate. This control is to show a list of all of the active third parties. Clicking on those, you'll be able to select the application and then the table report that contains the data that you want to convert to evidence. Here is where you'll actually be able to set up the automation. So let's say this control we want to evaluate monthly. I want that to start, let's say on Monday, or on the 14th at 12 p.m. Here I have the workflow step and field of where that evidence will be added. This can be configured on the builder side of things, but these are defaults to make it a little bit easier to set up these automations. Then you can leave this unassigned, the new record. You can assign it to a specific user. So if I wanted to assign it to myself, or you can assign it to a user in a user field. So in this case, I want to assign it to the control owner, and I want to give them 3 days to review. Clicking on next will bring you to this summary tab where you'll be able to review what you just set up, what evidence you're collecting, when you're collecting it, where the new record will be created, who it will be assigned to, and how long they have to review. Clicking save there. we'll add it to the table here. You are able to edit, run that ad hoc, disable it, or delete the automation. Clicking on Run Now will actually run that immediately so that you can see here we have a linked evaluation. Clicking on that is where the evidence will be added. So you can see that assigns to the control owner automatically, which was me. Scrolling down here, you can see this is the active third-party table report that I clicked in the previous tab. Clicking on that will bring up your evidence, and you'll be able to see here's a list of all of my third parties. You can easily download that to share it, and it's added right here to the record automatically. Again, converted from a table report to a CSV, added right here to the record. Now, in order to set that up from the builder side of things, this is really easy. It's just a workflow setting. So clicking on settings from your workflow, going to this advanced tab, you just check that box to enable automated evidence collection. Then once it's enabled, you will be able to add that section to a step. So the section that I indicated earlier, I have that added down here. And here's where I can configure those defaults so that it pre-populates like I showed you in the automation configuration. So here you can see those defaults that I had populated with control eval in progress, and supporting docs. And adding the defaults, that's how easy it is to add to a record. Feel free to email me and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you all.
All right. So if that was the first time you've ever seen anything like that before, or maybe you've been considering investing in this type of technology for some time now, there's really 3 things you can do today to kind of help build that future business case and put the foundation in place to take your team and organization where you want to go. So first, start building that business case now. We'll address this a little bit more in the Q&A, but essentially time savings, audit readiness, findings, time to certification. Those are just a few ideas of metrics you can use to kind of build buy-in and improve ROI over time, even post-investment. Next, we created a free guide to help you navigate through this process. So it summarizes really everything we discussed today and highlights additional options for automating, scaling, and improving your security and compliance initiatives. You can actually download that right now from your resource widget within the UI here. And finally, if you're ready to dive in right now or you want to learn a little bit more, we'd love to have you join us for a custom demo. You can scan that QR code on the screen that's showing right now, or head over to logicgate.com if you would like to learn more. So with that, Peter, what questions does the audience have for us?
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, we're going to go right into our Q&A. But before we do, I'd like to remind everyone about the webinar survey. I mentioned it earlier. We'd still like you to fill that out. It's available on the bottom of your presentation window. And again, thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation helps us to serve you better in the future. You can still type in your questions. It's not too late to submit a Q&A question. Just type it into the Q&A window, which is located in the middle of your screen, or you can just click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll try our best to get to all the questions. If we're unable to answer them all, we'll share them with our speakers who can reply to you offline. All right, we have some questions, so let's take a look. The first one is you talked about time and resource savings. Could you explain a little bit more about where those come from? I think we talked about that they're on both sides, the user side and the audit. So maybe John and Adam both could address that.
Yeah, I can start, and then Adam would love to hear your perspective. So more clearly, the time and resource savings on the, so you just saw an example of an automation set up to request the list of active third parties. Now, if you're running like a SOC 2 Type 2 and need to maintain continuous compliance, that might be a request that goes out monthly or quarterly to somebody in your business to go, hey, vendor management team, or your third-party risk management team, or your cybersecurity team, please pull down the list of our active vendors, kind of showing that we've performed risk assessments on them, and can you upload that into this shared drive or this platform somewhere? That is eliminated because they no longer have to do that. So that's one simple example of one evidence from one control, which we would automate, which you no longer need to do that repetitive task. So that's a more specific example of how this kind of plays out in reality.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on, I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but another classic example, you're going through these compliance frameworks, whether it's SOC 2, whether it's ISO, anything like that. By getting the certification and going through the compliance process with the platform or without it, either way, it's saving you a lot of time on the back end when you're going through all these questionnaires, when you're doing your due diligence, when you're writing contracts, when you're entering into partnerships. All that stuff, it's going to be a huge time savings, not only for the IT folks, but it perforates throughout the organization, right? It's going to save legal time, it's going to save HR time, and all that time savings eventually saves money over in the long term, but it also allows the organization to reallocate those resources to other things that could be more beneficial, like security as an example.
Okay, great. Let's go on to our next question. It has to do with staffing, and we know staffing is difficult these days. So here's the question. Would you say that leveraging automation can help an organization with its staffing challenges? And I guess the follow-on is, if so, how?
Yeah, happy to take that one as well. But Adam, feel free to jump in. That we touched on this. I think Megan touched on this a bit with kind of an anecdote from one of our customers. But I do think there's of course like the allocation of resources to the right places. So could we potentially defer a hire because we're able to automate more of the process? But this also comes into play in just like talent acquisition. Do we have technology in place to where people want to work at our organization because they get to do a more strategic role as a purely tactical role, which I think is enticing to a lot of people in, if you are in a more cyber compliance or audit function, being able to stretch and do more strategic work as opposed to just kind of the follow-up busy work. I think that can help with some of the staffing challenges on a pure like talent acquisition standpoint.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it certainly helps with staffing challenges. The automation piece allows for your current workforce to be more efficient, right? Once you get it up and running, everything's going to be more efficient. And once you start seeing that ROI after the first year or so, I would just say the one kind of word of caution: don't silo yourself to like one or two people knowing the platform. Make sure that you have a good depth there. That way, in case that one or two people decide to leave or move on or go somewhere else, then you're just kind of stuck. And you're like, what do I do with this platform now? So make sure you're cross-training and make sure there's several people aware of what to do and how to do it.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, our next question. Is there any integration with Microsoft OneDrive?
Yeah, so we have a pretty aggressive roadmap to kind of build out additional connectors to our automated evidence capability. The Microsoft suite, including SharePoint and OneDrive, is on that, and we're currently investigating adding that to the platform. So a lot of our customers are on the Microsoft stack, so understand the importance there. So yeah, that's definitely something we're baking into the product.
Great, thanks, John. All right, next question. I love the idea of using automation for collecting and storing evidence. However, my company uses a lot of internal custom controls that don't align to common frameworks like ISO. Is it possible to achieve this same kind of automation using custom controls?
Indeed, it is. Many of our customers have their own set of defined internal controls that they have. And we allow our customers to kind of centrally map those to their frameworks. So what that allows you to do is understand for an internal control you have what other frameworks might it be tied to. Maybe you only do SOC 2 today. You don't go through ISO, but in the future you want to understand what the relationship is to your controls that you do, the evidence you collect, and the ISO 27002 controls. So we provide that ability within the platform to kind of do that cross-linking and cross-compliance capability. So it 100% is possible, and most of our customers have internal controls that they're managing evidence against and getting an audit and doing their audits against. I would say those oftentimes though are distinct rule sets for evidence that you're pulling based on the framework and audit you're doing. Particularly when it comes to something like PCI, which you want to set up multiple of those evidence rules on one of your internal controls based on what framework that you're getting compliant with.
Great, thank you. All right, the next question is about money. We all like to talk about money. Here we go. I don't have a line item in my budget for something like this next year, but I'd like to explore it further. Do you have any recommendations for building a business case for this type of solution? And where would I start?
Anyone feel passionate about taking that? Megan, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can definitely take that one. So it doesn't have to be perfect science. It has to be directionally correct, right? So I wouldn't get overly fixated on understanding every single step in your overall compliance and audit workflows. Maybe model it after just a handful and then extrapolate that out over what that looks like for every certification process that your organization has on the docket for the next 12 months. Again, as long as you can defend your model, it doesn't have to be perfect. So that is one easy way to get there more quickly. The other advice that I have for you is work with your software provider that you're talking to. I think there's no one better prepared to help you make that business case, who might have just as much skin in the game as you do. So don't hesitate to lean on them as well to help you do this. They talk to hundreds of people every year who are going through that same process. So I think if you don't over-engineer it, business case sounds businessy, but it doesn't have to be hard. So don't be your own worst enemy there.
Thanks, Megan. I think we have time to sneak in one more question. And here it is. Excuse me. My team is strapped. I'm not sure we have the internal resources to implement a solution like this. And my question is, how resource intensive is it to set up these integrations and automations? And also, how do others balance that effort with compliance tasks that you simply can't put on the back burner?
Yeah, so LogicGate, with our software, we have our implementation team that really helps you onboard to the software. So even though you're strapped with the current compliance task that you're in, we kind of guide you through that process and take on a lot of the heavy lifting of that work. And then also it's kind of the concept of like early upfront investment on setting up these automations pay off in the long term. So although it might be a little bit more work to think through the automations and integrations that you want to set up now, it's going to start to pay off long term and kind of free up resources for your team down the road.
Okay, great. We're coming up on the top of the hour. So any closing statements before we say goodbye? Megan?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did see one last question come into the Q&A, and that is the software we were demoing was Risk Cloud. So that is that automated integrated GRC platform. And so definitely take lessons learned from this, right? Your team has more to do than they could possibly do, right? With the resources you have at hand. I know it's cliche to say work smarter, not harder, but I truly think this is the path forward. And we touched on it briefly, but poll your team, ask them how much they enjoy collecting manual evidence, going through tedious, repetitive tasks. Don't overlook the value to the business, value to the team, and the value to your culture of solving this problem, not just for those who might yourself or those who might report into you, but really for the broader org and the opportunities that it can uncover. It truly is an investment.
Great, thank you. Well, John, Megan, Adam, we all appreciate your time and your expertise today. And I'd like to thank our sponsor, LogicGate. I'd like to thank everyone out there in the audience. We certainly appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email. This will contain details and a link to today's presentation on demand. If you have colleagues and peers who didn't join us today, invite them to check out this event on demand. The webinar is copyright 2023 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Information Week and LogicGate. The individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our sponsor, LogicGate, I'm Peter Krass. Thanks for your time and have a great rest of your day.